Well, I was born in 1929. We didn't know we were poor during the Depression because everybody's in the same boat. We didn't get electricity until October 1943. So I had quite a bit of experience without electricity.
We didn't have electricity and really didn't miss it because we hadn't had it. But we did visit relatives and we saw how nice it was. So we really appreciated the electricity when we did get it. Electricity has been a wonderful thing, just a wonderful thing for us.
And in our younger days, when we were kids around home, the worst thing was washing clothes and things like that. But we didn't realize what electricity meant to us because we lived pretty happy before that.
Mother always had to wash on the board to begin with. And we had a dining table and we just had a kerosene lamp. We got awful close to be able to see. And that's where we studied, where we did. It was an interesting life.
Well, before electricity, we had a kerosene lantern, and we also had a gasoline lantern. Boy, you had to be careful where you hung them in the barn, because you had cobwebs and hay and chaff, and it was really dangerous. For refrigeration, I remember Mother would have a wooden trough and keep water in that outside in the shade in the summertime and set stuff in there to keep cool. We'd hang stuff in the well or in the cistern.
Before electricity, we had these old wooden handles. You locked them into the base, which was an iron, and put them on the stove till they got hot. And oh, you had to be careful or you'd burn things up.
My dad tried to get electricity from the CIPS. Well, they wanted $1,000 to run a half-a-mile line. And man, $1,000 back in 1941 was a lot of money. And so we just didn't get it from them.
It took the rural electrification program to get the electricity into the country. It was always in the cities and the smaller towns, but when the REA was organized, it gradually crossed the country and the counties and so forth. It was good that we had our own representatives from a local community that would serve on the board. To me, it was an economic feature for the farmers because we went through the Depression. So my family, well, they didn't just go out and spend money for anything. They had to have a good reason.
When my parents first received word that they might have electricity, they were a little bit hesitant about it, which a lot of people were, I think. They were a little leery of what it might amount to and what problems they might have. They were afraid of what the cost. It was reasonable, I feel at the time, but they felt it might go up drastically, and they had gotten along without it.
We had to have $15 signed up on it. Oh, well, that's a lot of money. Of course, you paid $3.50 a month, most people did.
Well, the main people then at that time was the money. They didn't think that they could afford $3.61 a month for having electricity. Clark County was a little bit behind Edgar in some respects. The ground wasn't quite as good down there, and some of them didn't think they could afford it.
We had to sign up to be in the co-op and pay so much, I can't remember that was $15 or $20. When it first come around, a lot of people weren't interested in signing up because they had to do some things that they didn't want to do, and we didn't know we had the money to do it or not.
So you had to talk to every individual and convince them that that was the thing for them to do. They thought it was going to maybe cost them a lot of money, and they couldn't afford it. So they had to be convinced that that was the new idea, was the right idea, the way to go.
On our road, we had about a half a mile of brush, like along the road. And O.J. Bandy, I think he was about your first manager, he said you'd have to clear that, get that all cleared off at the members' expenses. The first neighbor, he didn't want electricity. He'd lived all those years without it, and he could get along without it. Then the next place was ours, and of course Dad and Mother were really wanting electricity. The next neighbor down the road, he didn't want it. I don't know, I think maybe they didn't want to have to pay for the cleaning the brush. But the next neighbor, he wanted it, and he said he would clear the brush. He would clear that half-mile brush for $75. And he did. And then they could build a line up through there.
It's fascinating to think about the cooperative being around for 75 years and how exciting it was to be able to get electricity into the home, and how the cooperative was formed, and thinking about how they dug the holes to put these poles in. Having come from a farm, I have used the post hole digger before, and I only went in the ground about 3 feet, and these guys dug holes that were 5 feet plus, and the lifting up of the poles, it was very hard work in order to get the initial 30 miles of line in.
In those days we used to pike poles. A pole pike was a stick about 3 inches across and 10 or 12 foot long with a spike in the end. And you used that spike to hold the pole so that you could get it straight. Used 4 of them, and they were heavy. And I got volunteered to go out and help. Sunday evening, I had a hold of a pike going to hit the pole. Instead of hitting the pole, I missed it and banged Rusty Sproul's hard hat. I rung his bell. I wasn't much help.
Rusty Sprouse, Clayton Sprouse and I were young people out of school, out of the service, and both of us working there. He and I were linemen together. They'd send us out on a job, a bunch of trees, and they'd have other work that they could be doing. There wasn't enough of us that there could be a foreman looking over us all the time. So we was real good working together. At that time, the co-op office was located downtown, right on Main Street, and if people were familiar with it, it was the north edge of town. The second stoplight was where it was in an old restaurant building where we had it. It had a basement and an upstairs. I started to work at Edgar Electric down at Charlie Brown's old restaurant. That was 219 North Main. It was basically one big room, and then there was an office or two upstairs, and I was in the basement. I got a promotion. Ed Hardy was the manager, and that was it. There was 3 or 4 girls, and myself and Hardy, and then the line gang. It was a good group to work for and with. And that's unusual to find a group that you can go along with inside and out and get along with them. We had a bunch of nice girls that worked in the office. They would keep pretty good track of us and watch out for us all they could.
Well, I was a cashier in the front office, and there were 2 girls that were older than I that were head of the office when I first started working there. Well, as they got older and retired, well, then we filled their jobs and took their places. Then new ones came along, and the new employees were cashiers always, and then they'd work up to bookkeeper or whatever, you know. We just kept it a family. We all got along well together. I don't know that we ever had any problems. I suppose the boss would say, I'll knock your head off your shoulders if you don't straighten up and fly right. No, it wasn't like that, but we just kept the place going.
When I started at the co-op, they didn't have that much equipment. We had a pretty new A-frame truck, and a small maintenance truck that was what our equipment was. And everything was done by hand pretty much. All the digging was done by hand. Ed Hardy was the manager of that time. He was more of a line hand than he was a manager, probably. So he worked as a manager for a few years, and then they replaced him then with another manager that was Maurice Johnson. And when he drove up in a black Chevrolet, and we said, ooh, things is going to be different around here now because we're not going to be able to do some of the things that we did do. And that was right. He was a wonderful guy. He was a manager, and if he said something, why, you could believe that it was going to be that way. And he was good to us, but he expected 8 hours work out of you, and he usually got it, and he was good for us. Cliff Lineman's was one guy that they would go out and get right-of-ways ahead of time. Another of them was Russell Elledge, but he was also involved in that. And he would promise some things sometimes that we didn't know too much about. I remember one deal that he came to me and says, I need a little help, I'm in a little trouble. He promised some people that the co-op would cut a bunch of trees, but the co-op didn't want to cut a bunch of trees, so Russell and I cut the trees, so that kind of eased things up a little.
When I first went to work, I think it's $150 a month. I drawed up the staking sheets. They drawed me a picture on a brown piece of paper or something, and I transferred it to a staking sheet. And then from there it was tabulated, and no, it was just a good job. I wasn't about to kick a good thing in the teeth.
The engineers then would stake the line out, and then the contractor would come in and start building. But some of the people were kind of hard to get the right-of-way from. It wasn't on the record, but some of the farmers would sort of get together, and if somebody wouldn't want them to build a line there, that they'd kind of sweeten the pot a little, and they would go ahead then and get the job done.
And when people would come in with a problem, they knew they could talk to us, and we'd try to figure out what the problem was and straighten it out for them. And we did that. That's what we were there for. And at that time, when electricity was new in the country, and we were just adding lines 3 to 6 miles at a time, you know, and making people happy. It really did.
Before electricity, our radio had a lot of batteries. We listened to the Green Hornet and the Lone Ranger. Saturday night, too, we'd listen to the WLS Barn Dance. But otherwise, that radio had to stay shut off. That goes back to the reason we didn't know about the December 7th Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor until about 7 o'clock that evening. It's on Sunday, and of course we couldn't play the radio on Sunday. We went to church and come home, and I suppose, I don't know what we did in the afternoon. Went back to church that night, and the preacher announced that the Japanese had attacked Pearl Harbor.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
Most of the people looked at each other and said, where's Pearl Harbor at, you know? But a lot of them found out.
They had the A section built, and that was it. The war come along, and they cut the wire out, and the copper, and all that. And so it just more or less stagnated during the war. And then afterwards, it was still tough to get wire and stuff like that.
Material was hard to get, equipment was hard to get, so you didn't have too good of equipment to work with. It was mostly what you'd call a pile of junk. It was some stuff that the Army had got through with.
During the Depression, we had lived up around Chicago quite a bit, and of course had all the modern conveniences. So then we moved back to the farm. Dad rented ground, and He was determined, I think, from the time we moved back, that if it was ever possible, he would have electricity and bath facilities and all of that. I think we got the first electricity probably in '43, and that was a great thing. And I do remember we had a Montgomery Ward refrigerator. That was great. As time went along, we moved maybe just about a mile south, and it was across the railroad, and we didn't have electricity. Oh my, that was, whew. And so Dad got down there and they said, well, if you clear the right-of-way from the other direction south, you know, bring it up, you can have it again. So Dad got busy and we cleared that and he got electricity again. So that was great, you know. Well, we lived there 2 years and he bought a farm closer to Paris. It was at the end of a lane, about, oh, I suppose a mile-long lane, mud road. Oh, goodness. So he got busy and cleared the right-of-way again. And about that time, the REA fellow said, now listen, Ted, we can't carry this around in a bucket. So it's time you stopped moving. And we didn't. We didn't move anymore. We stayed there.
Well, I can remember when we got electricity because I had been in town shopping. And on the way home, I got to the top of our country hill just ahead of our house, and I could see lights on. They had just turned on the electricity at the meter pole. Well, my heart just jumped. Well, I've been looking forward to it, I can tell you that. From then on, we had electricity when they'd go home at night. It was great.
Mother would come home and talk about running the lines, and I had no idea what running the lines meant. So we got in the car one day, and she drove us around and showed us the lines from power pole to power pole, and she said that's where our electricity came from. And I thought she was really an intelligent woman because she knew how that power went through those lines, not realizing that she didn't really understand a whole lot more than I did about how the power went through the lines. But it was impressive for her to be able to tell us. And then all of a sudden there's that last pole, and I said, now where did the power go? And she said it has to wait until it can be extended a little further. And that's just the way it was. It was extended, and it was a new thing. People were afraid of it, afraid it wouldn't, it wouldn't work, they'd waste their money. But my, if they could have had some insight, there would have been no one that would have said, no, I don't need to sign up for this.
I think we were a little bit nervous about it when we knew they were coming. But then we were happy because we knew we were going to get electricity. We didn't know how soon, because it was kind of a prolonged thing. But it was wonderful that we knew we were going to get it.
They talked about it in Edgar County, but we'd never had anything down our way, and I remember, to see us about it because they didn't have the money to run that far. So anyhow, through all of that, we finally got some electricity, very slow. And we really enjoyed it after we got it. And I really appreciate the Lord have taken care of us and given us electricity.
The old directors that were on, they were neighbors of ours and friends of ours. We knew everybody. It was like one big family.
All the directors were good and efficient and worked for the co-op. And that's how we developed and got along so well. Went so far, built a lot of lines.
Being acquainted with some of the directors that were on the board, it does give you a chance to communicate with them and give them some of your concerns and so forth, and suggestions even.
With board members voted on from throughout the district, you have a close relationship with those people a lot of times, and you get your point across to the board that is running the organization.
I talk more for my folks, I think, probably than myself, because it was something, really special to them to be able to say, our electric system. I think they did appreciate having something they belonged to, a co-op.
Back before electricity, things was, well, of course, when you don't have something, you don't miss it. But then after you get it, you see what you'd missed. We had a furnace, and Well, it was all gravity, you know, and gravity just don't go upstairs too good. When we got electricity, boy, that was nice. We had electric fan, no air conditioner, but a fan. And then I got rid of that old furnace. We had even heat all day long, night.
We would soon have electricity in our corner of the world. And we were so excited. And I just couldn't wait one night when I came home. And when I got out in the dark country, it was all lit up. I get choked up with this. All lit up, lights everywhere. And I couldn't wait to get home. When I got there, we didn't have any electricity. And it was about 2 weeks later before we got them. But oh, it was an exciting time.
Well, the co-op has been very generous with we farmers and helped us. If had any problems at all, it was just call in and they were right there. When we got electricity, boy, she sure lit up the barn. So we got an electric milking machine and we had our old cows in the barn. It's hard to believe that you see your neighbor. Of course, our closest neighbor is about a quarter of a mile. They had a yard light.
After we got the electricity, of course, there was TV. We had one of the first TVs in the county. And Dad always liked to watch the wrestling matches. You really couldn't see anything except snow, but once in a while you'd see somebody working around with the wrestling, and he would get a kick out of that.
We watched the Democrat convention, not intentionally, but because that was what was on, and we were Republicans.
Probably the first thing we got was an electric iron, and it was wonderful, just wonderful. You ironed things that you didn't have to iron. I remember Mom ironed wash rags one time.
I remember the day that we got electricity at our house because it was amazing. You could push this button or flip this switch and the light would come on, and then you'd do it again and the light would go off, and that was magic.
Over the years, I've attended practically every meeting that I could, and that's been for several years now. It's meant a lot, really, to find out what the improvements are that the electric company and cooperative can give to the members.
It was a lot of fun when they had an annual meeting. Now, Mother said it was a lot of work. I didn't see her typing all the reports that now I know she had to type prior to and following, but it was a wonderful day. They usually had some entertaining, they had good food, and it was just exciting to see that many people come together, and it was a big event.
We can come to the annual meeting and vote, you know. I know we're on a couple of votes, but then sometimes 2 votes will make a difference. And at least we can growl.
We were always interested in the drawings. And, you know, what are we going to win? Maybe we'll win some special thing. So we were interested in that. And as years went along, we had a furniture store in Marshall and always gave pictures, wall pictures, for the drawings, for the REA. And it was just always, we didn't want to miss going to the REA. And I enjoyed the annual meeting, and a lot of times I look forward to maybe winning a prize, but that I haven't been fortunate enough, but I'm going to keep coming till I do.
The most satisfaction that I get is being able to provide reliable power. I also get satisfaction working with the wonderful employees that we have here. It's the membership and knowing the people in the community, in the rural settings, that make us feel like we're part of a co-op family.
Well, my fondest memory of working for the co-op were the people that we had to deal with. They were conscientious and courteous, and they wanted us to do what was right for them, and they would do right for us.
Well, I think one of the main things that I enjoyed was to see those kids along about when time of school was out. They would come home and we would have the lights on by that time and see their look in their eyes, and it just was real gratifying to see all that take place.
If your folks hear anything and they're prejudiced against something, you'll know it. Well, I didn't hear any prejudice in our house against anybody in the co-op. So they must have all been pretty good people.
Well, I can't imagine living in a rural area today without having the advantages of that power coming to us and the phone lines to us. It's no different than being a city person living in the country today. We have the same advantages that they have. And what a miracle that somebody had the foresight and the insight to figure that there was a way to do that and make it happen.